Right, time for the next roundtable. Thank you for the people who've been with us since this morning. Welcome. We've started. Please take a seat. So it's the last panel on a topic which I find particularly interesting, and it's particularly interesting to finish on money when we talk about cybersecurity and security. Very often we talk about costs because it's costly in terms of investment, but it's also costly when you are attacked, when you lose money to hackers. But it's precisely because we have tools in place, and it's because we have companies that provide security for the ecosystem that we can build an industrial sector. It's because we have protective measures that you have people willing to invest millions of dollars. So thank you for being with us. Just a few words about our panelists, and then I will ask a first question, and we will keep 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A with the audience. I'm Benjamin Thomas. I'm a consultant for Orange Cyber Defense, working on blockchain activity. I'm François Volpuet. I'm the General Director of Chainalysis for France, Israel, and French-speaking Africa. I'm Vincent Le Gallic. I'm the CTO of Cometh. And I'm Raphaël Bloch, one of the co-founders of Big Whale, after spending time working for Reuters and the Les Echos newspaper. A first question to all three of you. Are we able today to really put a figure on the cost of cybercrime in the world of cryptocurrency? We hear a lot of figures. I think we had a really good presentation by a colonel from the gendarmerie who was talking about 1% of cryptocurrencies representing illegal activities, the illegal part of crypto, 1%. Can we have a rough idea or an accurate idea of how much it represents? What is the cost? What is being invested by the companies in terms of protection? Now, it's interesting to look at the issue from a different perspective. As you know, transparency is part and parcel of the blockchain, which makes illegal activities easy, but this is something that all illegal stakeholders have not yet understood. So to give you a figure, if we look at 2024, illegal activities, as far as we can monitor it, it's 0.14% of the global volume of exchanges in cryptocurrencies. But since transactions are registered forever, we can go back and find transactions and identify a given perpetrator. Sometimes we can find monies years later. But if we look at last year, 2023, it was 0.24%, and then last year 0.14%. So there's a downward trend. When we talk about illegal activities, are we only talking about activities following cyber attacks, or do cyber attacks only represent a minimal fringe? It's a small part. Well, it depends on what you call small. It's a significant activity, but maybe it's preferable to look at trends. If you look at the main trends, in terms of illegal activities with crypto assets, we have a significant increase in hackings because of North Korea, mainly. They really finance their nuclear programs through hacking. If you look at cyber in two ways, to give you an idea of the figure, the biggest cybercrime activity is scam. Scams represent 12.4 billion out of the 40.9 billion recognized as illegal activities. Scamming represents 12.4. But if you compare that with trustworthy currencies, scams in general, fraud in general, on a worldwide scale, we are somewhere between $500 billion in value, going up to $1,030 billion. That's the highest assessment. In France, it represents 1,570 euros per French inhabitant. Now, Vincent and Benjamin, what about the main risks in the world of cryptocurrencies? What are the main risks that you've identified? Very often we hear that the main error is the human error. Is that true? Is that also true in the world of cryptocurrencies? To come back to figures, every year between 2 and 4 billions are being stolen through scams or hacks. Every year it represents between 2 and 8% of the total value found in the smart contracts of decentralized finance on the blockchain. So between 2 and 8 billion, it's enormous, it's huge. But you have to put that in perspective with the general size, global size of cybercrime. 2025 cybercrime will represent 10,000 billion worldwide. So we're talking about 2 to 4 billion. This is to put in perspective. But we hear about it a lot because in the world of blockchain, the users are directly impacted and not the cost centers. So when we talk about 10,000 billions ransomware, between 2 and 8 billion, I'm talking about the money of the users, their personal income. Now, in terms of threats, we've seen a change in threats over the last few years. It started in 2016, 2017 with the emergence of these smart contracts. At the time, some people were finding vulnerabilities in the code. Now codes are becoming better. Codes in smart contracts are less vulnerable. So now we have hackers that are more state hackers or financed by states, and they use it to finance their nuclear development programs or others. So the profile of attackers are changing, the scale is changing, the target is changing. It used to be smart contracts, essentially. Now we're getting closer to what we find in traditional IT or traditional finance, attacking end users. I've got nothing to add on figures. I don't know the figures. Now, the invitation to come and hack, it's a public invitation. If you put a lot of money in one place, in a way, you're inviting people to try and steal from you. So you can either say, we're hyper safe, I have hundreds of billions of dollars, we've never been hacked, so we're extremely safe, but it would also be an incitation, like a jewel shop, leaving the door open and saying, I've got wonderful jewelry, do you want to come and steal from me? Now, that's a valid point that you're making, Vincent. We hear a lot about hacking, particularly in the media. And 15 years ago, the sheer idea of blockchain and crypto was to decentralize all this. And I think that now, in terms of blockchain, we have foolproof security, but that there are failure points or entry doors for attacks in the companies, in the intermediary, in the platforms. Is this how we can look at this universe, or are there many, many areas that can still be under attack, that are not well protected? We've made significant progress. The crypto natives, as Cometh, they have spent a lot of time finding innovative solutions to secure their product. Now we've moved into more security, and this is to be put in perspective with the downward trend in illegal activities. But if you come back to the scams that we all know, just to give you the cyber take, if we talk about scams, the biggest entry point is the authorized payment push. So we're looking at authorized payment that can happen to anyone, anywhere, anyone in the room, any wallet, and they will make this payment look legit. Most companies today use ID to authenticate their payment. If identity has been hacked, if there's been a theft of identity, the payment will go through. Now, actors in the blockchain are more and more protected. We really see an increase in the quality of the security, but the traditional stakeholder is faced with more and more sophisticated attacks. Yes, you talk about sophisticated attacks. Even if the level of security is increasing over time, there's still a huge discrepancy between the means of attackers, particularly state-financed attackers with limitless means, and the resources of the companies, small companies, very small companies, startups, and the discrepancy between those two worlds is huge. I think it's the first time in the history of IT that small and medium-sized companies are under attack from state attackers. Yes, we have big actors, but we also have a few small actors. For example, Vincent at Cometh. You don't only work with big companies. Does it cost a lot to be safe in the crypto world? Is it particularly complicated for a small company? Well, we're a company of 20. Half of us work on issues of security. When we do smart contract auditing, this is what's expensive. But what we try today is to use as many standards as possible. I think it's the legislation that is costly rather than the code auditing, implementation of best practices, etc. We've chosen to be service provider on digital assets. So we had to put in place the legislation, and this had a cost. I think that it is now allowing us to work with more traditional stakeholders. But this desire to protect the end user was already in our DNA. So that's why a small player like Cometh has really managed to get a lot of clients, because we were already back then using technologies that were very similar to what you use today when you want to authenticate a payment on your smartphone, where your phone or your banking apps asks you whether you are willing to proceed to payment. So I think that the maturity of the security in the blockchain world is elevated compared to the traditional world. Would you say the same? I'm talking about Orange Cyber Defense. You work in both worlds, the real and the digital. Are crypto stakeholders more mature? It seems surprising to me, but maybe I'm mistaken. Yes, I only half agree with my colleague. People who come to see us are among the mature ones, because the sheer fact of coming to see us means that they want a 360-degree protection. But if you take the Bybit example, that happened, back 2 months ago? Bybit, the exchange site of crypto assets with several billions, was hacked. 1.5 billion was stolen, attributed to Lazarus, the North Korean group, and the attack went through the digital wallet they use for Safe. The Safe wallet was compromised, the interface was tampered with, and the workers of Bybit who think they're doing a normal transaction are in fact signing up for a transaction that was created by the attacker. This is a clear example of a lack of maturity of a major actor in the world of crypto or Web3. They're managing billions of dollars, but they were not protecting the third parties. They were not using solutions fit for purpose and solutions not properly configured. Now, for Safe, the digital wallet they were using, the hack occurred because a developer within Safe had his PC infiltrated by a virus. So clearly, he didn't have a firewall that was performant enough. So if we want safe, decentralized finance, we really have to put in place protective measures, because what happened is not very reassuring. So there are very diverse levels of maturity in the sector. I think a number of actors still believe that security is all about smart contracts, and the first reaction of Safe was to say our smart contract is safe, but it's not the contract that was attacked, it's the interface. So the cypherpunk actors focus on smart contracts, but you have to look at the security 360. This is the attacks we have today. What will happen today? A wallet like Betamax from B2C, this will have another impact on the ecosystem. Will it be the wallet of the main decentralized application, with again an impact on the system, or the lower level Linux that will allow an entry point? There are many things to bear in mind, and the system is not necessarily looking at it. So what can be done to avoid repeated hacking operations? The entry point can be the PC from an employee that's not properly secured. In the crypto world, you have the rules and regulations, and we've really raised the standards, and it's quite costly today in proportion of what the sector represents. So for SMEs, it's quite complicated. But on that, do you think that the safety standards we have in the crypto world are adequate? Are we not on a par with what we see in the traditional world? Before I answer your question, Raphael, I'd like to come back to what Benjamin said. Let's not shame a whole sector. If you put that in parallel with the traditional world, what I like to say, what I always say, is that even if we take our share in the war effort to securize the crypto world, I'd like to say that money laundering at the global level, if we look at trustworthy money, euro, dollars, it's 3% of the world GDP. In crypto money, we're talking about $40.9 billion, 0.14%. Let's keep things in perspective. But the Bybit case, many people know here that we work with Bybit. I think we've recovered last week. I think we've recovered $40 billion out of 1.4. It's not much, but it's ongoing work. The recovery work is ongoing. Now, the sector was really focused on innovation for a long time. We're looking at young companies, recent companies, and to the contrary of what we find in the traditional world, I rarely see passwords that are just lying around. This is something that we see very often in traditional companies. So let's be very clear about the perspective we take on the crypto world. The situation is getting better thanks to companies like ours. To answer your question now, Raphael, we've bought two companies, Chainalysis. We work with enforcement forces. They've developed a lot of skills. But when I say we arrive after the battle, I mean we come after the scam, we come after the hack, we help the inquiry, we trace the money. But our belief within Chainalysis is to be proactive. We have to act upstream from the hack, from the scam. And to do that, we need to develop tools, automation, with all the applications we need to audit in real time the smart contracts, to analyze in real time faults and breaches, something that didn't exist back in the time. We're also developing tools which make it possible to have an exchange with the scammer before the scammer reaches the client. That's what being proactive is all about. It's different from the real world, the traditional world. Now, technology, you need to remember, blockchain is not really helping thieves. It's transparent. You can trace money on the blockchain, but with proactivity, you act upstream in terms of security.
On this topic, Vincent, on the European standards and regulations, you've worked on this quite a bit, and you continue working on this. So there's a large investment in this field, but can this create the required condition for a sector acceleration because there's more security, more trust? I would really hope so, because it's a large investment. If we want to convince people to do decentralized finance, so in the best use cases of the next 5 months of the cross-border payment, the people that we want to convince to go as close as possible to liquidity and treasury, and people who work on this. I remember there was a neobank called Morning, I don't know if you remember, that had collected money on behalf of someone else, and then the owner went away with all the money. So it's not just in crypto, and actually most of the hacks that are outside of the crypto, we don't hear about them, but it would be interesting to know how many employees have taken the money for themselves, really. So I don't think that regulations will impose a technological choice for us. I think it's more the philosophy that if you manage the funds of your clients, you have to show some guarantees, and this is normal. Can you give us a few examples of measures that you have had to put in place that did not exist a couple of years ago, and that guarantee an added security? So first of all, human resources. We had to have people who were better trained to have passive audits. So we were doing crypto, but we didn't know that you have to have this HSM on this kind of standard. So everything related to anti-money laundering, for us, everything was very technical. And so we had to get some people from the outside, people who had a financial background that we didn't have. So these are all the means that we used. And so on this topic, are all the companies coming to the same level, or some companies don't quite reach the cut and the level? And so how do you manage these kind of situations? I imagine, for example, that for Orange Cyberdéfense, you will have requests from groups that have the necessary money and means to work with you, but what about all the others? So being asked by companies that have the resources, yes and no. In the last few years, we've been the leaders in the small and medium companies. So it's interesting. If the work was done, it would have helped us to avoid some of the attacks we talked about earlier. But yes, how do we accompany them? First of all, it's important to give them a complete 360-degree vision. And so the risks, as explained by Mika and Dora, to have an approach that shows us all the risks, so to have a map of these activities, what is the risk, what is the path taken, and what measures to put in place to protect ourselves from this. That's the first stage, and it's essential. And so there's also the question of the workstation or the server that I talked about earlier. And then passive audit, that's also another topic that we accompany our clients. Obviously, for smaller actors, today it's not a passive audit that is required. It's a audit made by another supplier. And so there are many small actors that don't even have the resource to employ or to have any expenses. And so they hope and they wait, hoping that things will become a bit less rigid before the end of the transitory period of 2026. Just one element of a message in terms of regulation. Many non-European companies are working here and they don't follow the regulation. And for us, it's very difficult because for us, we realize that we've made so much effort to bend to these regulations. But then the question is, who has the right to do what in Europe? And so I'm passing on the message here. Yes, it's a good question. And Benjamin, I think that's important for small companies in the world of crypto to know that when cyber defense goes into crypto, this gives them the ability with reasonable costs and with expert capacity to go into cyber. So to answer your question, there's a lot of competition, obviously. We are going towards, if we look at the elections of Trump, if we look at both sides of the ocean, the election of Trump brings a lot in this point of view in terms of regulation. It removes the sanction and regulation part. So all the predecessors, SEC, and so on, we really were working in terms of sanctions and regulations. In France and in Europe, we have to find this balance, because if we have a deregulation, even if I talk about regulation that's not with sanctions, and if in Europe through Mika and Nora we increase significantly the constraints acting on this, that will have a problem with innovation. So obviously security is expensive, obviously because there are skills behind it. But we have to find this balance. And I agree with you, we have to be careful with this regulation and sanctions, and we have to find this equilibrium between innovation and regulation. And at the moment, we're still trying to find this, even though we're leaders in this, because Mika is a real path to follow for many in the world. Everyone would have to follow it, but we have to have a universal choice on this, because the blockchain should not suffer across borders. Regarding regulations, what is interesting with Mika and also with Dora is that the objective, especially with Dora, the idea is not to create rules just to have rules, but is to have a homogeneous kind of standard. And so the 5 main pillars of Dora in terms of managing risks and technology and information is to identify the risks, have a complete view of the risks, and that's what Mika is imposing, and to make sure that you have proportional measures. And it's very subjective, obviously, and there is no specific technical aspect or standard to this. The third pillar of Dora is management of risks linked to third parties. And if companies had followed this, the hack would not have taken place for some companies. So the regulation would have avoided the cyber attack. And sharing of information for most of the hacks is through means of attacks that were used in the past, but information is not shared between companies that this is a path of attack that's dangerous. So with Dora, this will be solved, because there will be sharing of information between different financial entities and regulatory bodies. So these are very important elements. So it's very interesting when we talk about blockchain, we identify quite a few issues in terms of security, but we don't think about what are issues that the blockchain could also solve in terms of security. And I feel that perhaps there's a crossroads here in terms of traceability. And so is it not part of the global equation to have this important and determining element that, yes, it's an issue, there are many challenges in terms of security, but also it helps in terms of security? Well, I will look at it with the lens that it's obvious solution to the security issues. Now, obviously, blockchain has to be matured, and the actors in the blockchain activity. As I said earlier, this inherent transparency in the blockchain allows us to trace, well, avoiding all polemics, we don't trace the individuals. The job of a company like Chainalysis is to identify those parts of the real world and attach the wallets to these elements of the real world. So as the blockchain has this inherent transparency, everything is traceable, everything is public. Now, obviously, we have to be able to analyze it. So let's take a traditional value chain of a financial point of view. What is traceable? What is transparent? So when we ask this question, when we ask this simple question, we realize that the blockchain is already an answer, is already inherently secure. Now, to allow a maximum number of people to implement it, whether in the institutions, in the masses, and that's, I agree with you, that you have, first of all, a regulation, because the regulation, I'm part of those, of the old school people, and if there is a regulation in the bank, I'm not sure my money will be in the bank, because how do I know that the actor where I've put my money is secure enough? Because there are regulations and rules and so on. So when we put the transparency of blockchain, the capacity of companies like ours to follow what is happening, to help the law enforcement to analyze, to investigate, and to go and act when there is malicious action. And there are many times when our capacity to trace and follow up have allowed the law enforcement to do their job. So this, we have to remember this. It's traceable, and then also we have other use cases, that these are real technological use cases that will simplify cross-border payment and so on. Just to complete what you said, I completely trust that when I have my ledger key and when I do a transaction to move some of my Bitcoins, there is cryptography and I understand what's happening after that. It's a lot more secure than my bank. Between my and my Ethereum nothing is going to happen. Now, on the usability, that I have tried to distribute wallets for 3 years, and you show 12 months to someone, they take a picture of it on their phone. That's very funny, is that it's so difficult to use that people are using workarounds, and so the level of security that has been enforced by algorithms, where there are very few intermediaries, it's a very pure technology, but as it's difficult to use, as with everything else, there are shortcuts, and therefore we add intermediaries, and people use this technology in a way that is a bit scary. But it's a very good issue you're pointing out, because that's when we use it that we realize that, and of course this is moving forward, but the handling of a wallet or the use of a tools in this universe is not yet available to everyone. And this is an issue in terms of security, because if you don't understand everything, then you're very vulnerable. Yes, for example, we tried to replace the 12 words but by something that's familiar. Yes, sorry. So the password of the wallet, we try to replace the password by something that people use already. So that's the biometry of the phone. But the phone biometry can disappear. So we try to do a backup of this key. And people were telling us, Well, when I take the elevator, I'm not going to wear a parachute. So people are doing a self-custody in the design, and people don't want to imagine that there's a risk when they use a system. It's very difficult. It's very hard to add the steps in the learning. And obviously there are issues when people spend money to have users, and when we add stages to the onboarding, it's impossible to do it. Benjamin, on this topic, for Orange Cyberdéfense, you work on solutions that could simplify onboarding. Have you thought about this? No, not at all. But solutions to allow onboarding, they're being developed. We have a first solution that will come with Dectra and the first update. It's Spectra, right? Yes, Spectra. So is the account abstraction and the smart contract wallet. The fact is the digital wallet becomes a smart contract that can be programmable and that allows a multi-factor authentication, or that will allow it at the end, and would allow also a social recovery to be able to get back the password that you have lost in all security. So there are standards that are coming or are being written on this topic, and that will allow to answer this question. Our objective is not in this field, is to use existing standards, to recommend them, and to make sure there is a 360-degree security, whether it's the security of the smart contracts, the blockchain links, whether it's to steal money or about the information. It's to be able to have this global vision. And previously on the previous round table, in terms of technology, what can we do in terms of security to adapt to this? I remember when Jérôme talked about what you just said, that could have simplified with technologies that we use, like the smartphone, using the wallet. It's very fast. So how can we adapt with Chainalysis or Comet? I don't know if I have an answer. It's a miracle answer to your question. We try. I like the different posture that we have in terms of security. Because you work for a big company, you say, well, we're too big to fail because we have a bunch of security fail-safes. For us, it's the other way around. We're quite small, and so we go on the principle that we will fail. So every time there's a layer of security, we think that there must be a problem there. So let's add a second one, a third one, a fourth one, and we hope that the holes will not align themselves to create an issue for us. So we have a different posture that allows us to go from the hypothesis that what will happen if an employee in our company has bad intention, is malicious. So we've already had cases where this has happened. So what we're trying to do as much as possible is to, whatever we can put on chain, we do it. We talk about the hack of Bybit. It's bizarre that a smart contract can move such a high value. How much did you say? 1.5 billion? In one transaction towards an external address. We could imagine in a smart contract a rule that is enforced that you can only move 1 million. So after the first million, you could pause the system and say, oh, what happened? So our rule, so that I can sleep at night, because we manage a few millions, we have so many chains and rules on chain that if we trust Ethereum, we trust the smart contract, so that in worst case scenario, I limit the number of attacks as much as possible, as close as possible to the money. On our side, to complete what you said, in technology, if you listen to what Vincent said and the hack Bybit and what you said earlier, imagine that you have the capacity, and that's what the new elements of Chainalysis we have. How can we try to counteract or to close the road to these hacks and these attacks? Is that today, with technologies like Hexagate, you're able to replace one validator on a transaction by an automatization where all smart contracts where you don't have a data or this or that, not in the smart contract, but in the action of moving the funds. So where you say, I have human validators at some stage, you could say on big amounts, you could have a mechanism of validation. Well, in this case, the technology will be an additional validators. So you'll have, for example, let's say it's 4 of us to validate. The 4 of us will validate, and there will be a 5th one that will be based on AI. And not only that, will detect all the flaws and faults that can happen in a request of an execution of a contract, and that will be the technical validator. And at the end of the road, you have the security within the action. And for us, for chain analysis, is to create the security at the level of action. Because sometimes when we talk about this data vector, that are also human vectors that show as if they're a white account, where it's a real hacker. Well, we have in the smart contract, if in the execution we have a stage, a step or a parameter that will allow a technology to say, warning, here there's a known vector data, so we're not going to validate this. So these are new elements, and I agree with you. The complexity and the maps used by the malicious actors is huge. So we transport drugs or hacks or we rob a bank. It's complex. And our role is to go from reactivity, there's a hack, I will try and get the money back, like hack by bit. I'm proactive. At every validation, I have a check, a technological check to anticipate and avoid. Okay. And to complete what you said, Vincent, in reality, the approach that you have is interesting. What we try to do is to have a structured elements. What Mika and Dora do is to ask ourselves the question, is an internal attacker able to do something? This is the kind of question that we ask ourselves in an analysis of risk. What is the first pillar of Dora? One of the requirements of Mika that I talked about, this should be the first starting point of security. What is the worst case secure scenario? Is it internal? Is it a third party that falls, or is it compromised, or is it a smart contract? So it's to identify every single element and to have a priority in terms of the technological measures or others, as you mentioned. For example, in the Web2, there was a lot of theft of data because that's how it was stolen. And then when we had all the NFT, we had developers that were web developers that started managing private keys in the company. And some companies sold for several millions. I'm not going to say who they are, but they sold a whole bunch of NFTs, and people had to manage keys that were managing 10 to 15 million. There was no policy that like the one you were mentioning. So this makes me think that at the beginning of my career, when I was doing a city commerce, I shouldn't say it, but I had blue cards. I had small bases, and I was having all the credit card details of people, and so this was unencrypted. I was 18 years old. So today we are at this stage. So each person is redeveloping its own blockchain security, collecting and having company wallets, saying, oh, this private key, who has access to it? If this person leaves, what am I going to do? I have the impression that at some stage there are companies like Stripe and Swan and MangoPay that will encapsulate the payment so that people can suggest services without themselves being service providers. And I think that the APIs that we suggest, that we propose and develop, will be a decentralized financial system. And this will increase security, because today, when I add a Stripe click on my website, I don't take it all the way through. So each person has its own specialty. Let's take a couple of questions. So please go ahead if you have a few questions. Otherwise, you'll be available afterwards to answer directly. So if there are no questions, I have one. So I'm sure you're being asked this question quite often, but it's regarding quantum and IA and security. So I'm not just talking about breaking code, but we have this technological fusion where we talk about the crypto universe, and there's so much happening with IA, and so how do you manage these topics? So beyond the blockchain activities, I also talk about emerging technologies. So there's a lot of question on this. So once again, we should ask ourselves at how far are we exposed in front of this threat. So this quantum research is something that we're all looking at. Perhaps it's not something that is a concern right now, but maybe in 50 years. But no, quantum is part of asymmetric cryptography, and everyone says that in 2030, the algorithms that are part of the cryptography will be obsolete, and there will be something new. So it is scary that everything we've done since 1975 will be out of date, and we'll have to have new elements. So there is cryptography of every level of our work. So we will not even know where to start to know what do we have to migrate, where do we have to protect ourselves from. In case of blockchain, it's really critical because the blockchain is based on ODSA or signature algorithms of cryptography. So this is really the base of the blockchain. And there are few that will resist to quantum attacks. So some of them, like Ethereum, have in their roadmap to try and work on this. But one first recommendation would be to build these use cases on a blockchain that's thinking about this already and is thinking about the future and has a governance to evolve. And otherwise, they will not resist to these threats. So that's the first element of response. So first, we talked about smart accounts, and is to correlate the account and how to access this account. If you talk about your credit card, it's one way to move money from your bank account. So if you lose your credit card, you don't lose your bank account. So there's a wallet between the account and the access to the account. So we have a key with a private key and a public account. So we only have smart accounts. Maybe we're too early in the game, but now people are starting to realize that to de-link the account from how you access the link is how to allow to evolve the algorithm. On IA, 99% of bullshit and blockchain, one use case that I like on decentralized finance, we see things that we call agents, IA agents. So I don't know what they have in terms of IA, but AI. But when I see of off-chain and add a referee arbitration in terms of this AI, when I see these words, I don't look at them because I find that it's very marketing oriented.
Je me suis déjà exprimé sur le sujet.
Yes, AI for us is a shared tool that we already use in our trackability, tracing capacities, and we use it with bots, with agents. But really, we will channelize the biggest use of AI is designing interaction bots with the scammers, people based in Asia, in Nigeria, in Western Africa. These are well-known spots for scammers. So we go and get and collect all the information that will allow enforcement to go and pick them up. This is really the curse for banks. We're trying to make sure that all those entities, the banking sector, can proactively intervene before the scammers even get in touch with the victims. And this is one of the use of AI at Chainalysis. But I'm not as technically grounded as you. AI uses up a lot of resources, we know that, and the blockchain is not at all configured to provide a high calculation capacity. So when I see the two words together, blockchain doing AI, I'm puzzled. Yes, there are two topics. When we talk about AI, you have AI on the blockchain with a lot of decentralized projects looking at new language models, for example, on-chain, entirely decentralized, or AI for the benefit of the blockchain, and AI more generally for the benefit of security. And in our company, we have our defense department using it to better understand the threats, to automate as many tasks as possible, to have all the compromission detectors, indicators detected by our managers, so that we know every time a small company protected by us, we know, we detect it because we've understood the threat upstream. That's a good way to use AI. But when we talk about innovative technology in the world of blockchain, we can talk about the cryptographic innovation above and beyond the post-quantic, the MPC, for example, for the management of keys above and beyond HTTP. We have the HFE, represented by someone on the previous panel, many things. So a lot of new innovations to come that will improve the security of the environment. One last chance to ask a question, and if not, thank you very much to our panelists. You can give them a round of applause.